When India banned real money gaming in August 2025, the government believed it was shutting the door on a dangerous and largely unregulated industry. 6 months later, that door appears to be wide open, just with different players walking through it. Offshore betting platforms like Parimatch, 1xBet and Raja Bets have not just survived the crackdown, they have thrived, quietly amassing billions of visits from Indian users who find these sites just as easy to access as any mainstream app. No VPN, no workaround, just a mobile number and an OTP. In today's episode, I speak to my colleagues Disha Acharya and Ajay Rag, who wrote an excellent investigative piece on how these offshore betting platforms continue to proliferate in India. We ask the uncomfortable question: did the ban actually make things worse? Listen on, it's Tuesday the 10th of March. I'm Anirban Chowdhury. This is the Morning Brief. Hi Disha, Ajay, very warm welcome to the Morning Brief. Glad you could make time on a Sunday.
Thank you so much, Anirban, for having us here.
Thank you, Anirban.
I'll try to finish this quickly. We are recording at 6 p.m. on a Sunday. We are just an hour from the finals, and I'm sure both of you are looking forward to it and ready with drinks and friends and all of that. So we are talking about the really interesting deep dive that both of you did, that real money gaming platforms are thriving after 6 months of a practical ban by the government. Now, Disha, what brought you to this lead? Was it just curiosity on, let's take a status check on what happened to that ban? Or were there certain triggers that led you to this story?
Yeah, so the story started with a lot of curiosity for sure. But let me just go a step back. So it started about 6 months ago when the government introduced rules about banning real money gaming and online betting in the country. And that definitely put the entire industry in India to a halt. A lot of businesses pivoted, laid off people. There was a crackdown, which looked like it's working. I'm talking about August, September, right? And eventually, we started seeing that there are multiple posts on social media of users complaining about their money being stuck on these platforms. And that became our lead. We started speaking to the users, people in the ecosystems, which includes founders, lawyers, investors, former employees, and industry insiders. And a lot of them kept telling us the same thing, that offshore betting platforms were still running almost normally, even though the domestic platforms were shut down. So that made us think that let's do a check ourselves. And that's exactly when things got interesting. We realized that accessing many of these websites like Parimatch, 1xBet, or Raja Bets are actually very easy. You don't even need a VPN. You don't even need any special workaround. You just need to enter your mobile number and email. That's all. You get an OTP and you are in. And we started digging deeper into it and went back to our sources with this information that we found, spoke to ASCII, spoke to industry insiders to find out what really is happening. And yeah, that's how we found out more about it.
So but the question is, how exactly do these RMG platforms manage to thrive, and how are Indian users getting access to them? Ajay, can you give me more details on this?
So the big reason is actually simple, that these platforms are not based in India. So most of them operate out of overseas jurisdictions. So Indian regulators can't directly go after these companies themselves. And the main tool that the government has is to block these websites. But there is a problem here, that it quickly turns into a bit of a cat and mouse game. Like the moment one website is blocked, another version pops out, like with a slightly different domain name. So these are what people in the industry call mirror sites, like essentially the same platforms, but just under a new address. Also, the other thing we noticed during our reporting is how clearly these platforms are designed for Indian users. Like many of them offer their interface in Hindi, Marathi, Tamil, and Bengali, and other regional languages. So it's obvious, that they're not passively accessible in India. They're actively targeting users here, including in smaller towns. Also, there is a payments layer, as we all know, which makes it, very seamless. Like depositing money is super easy. You can use UPI, net banking, or digital wallets. And from a user's point of view, it feels like making any other online payment, whether it's like paying for a cab or ordering food. So yeah,
Hmm.
I mean, when you put all of these together, like easy access, local language interfaces, simple payments, and heavy promotion on social media, influencer channels, it becomes much, much easier to understand why these platforms continue to thrive.
Disha, let's set some context here. Tell me about the popularity of these offshore betting apps. In fact, one of the reports that I read said that four of these offshore betting platforms received 1.6 billion visits from Indian users in just 3 months. Tell me about it.
Yes, that's actually true. Let me give you a little bit of background there. So the
Hmm.
number that you just mentioned is by a report that came out in March 2025 by Digital India Foundation. They found that offshore betting platforms like Parimatch, Stake, 1xBet, Battery Bet all received 1.6 billion visits from Indian users between October and November 2024. But you will be surprised to know that this number has only increased ever since then. And there was another study by Cuts International in June 25, where they found out that all of the platforms that I just mentioned, along with another one called Fair Play, drew around 5.4 billion visits from India.
Wow.
And that's crazy numbers, right? And if I have to give you some more perspective around it, that Parimatch alone reported more traffic from India than platforms like Amazon X, LinkedIn, Hotstar, Quora, and Reddit. And that is crazy. And there was one more thing that this report highlighted was that these platforms also have cash on delivery style of payment systems when the local agents collect cash from users and credit it to their betting wallets. And this dramatically lowers the entry barrier, even for
Yeah.
minors who cannot access digital payment method.
Yeah.
And yeah, that just all the things that we just mentioned, along with surrogate websites, is increasing more and more traffic on these platforms. And to give more numbers of after the ban, there was a survey conducted by Cuts again. They found out that about 1,000 former real money gaming users in Delhi NCR region after the ban were shifting to offshore gaming websites. And the ban kind of didn't stop the activity, just that it pushed people from domestic platforms to unregulated offshore gambling platforms. And from 68.3%, the usage of offshore betting platforms increased to 82% post ban. That shows a spike of 13.7 percentage points from pre-ban level, making a clear behavioral shift which was triggered by the ban.
Got it. So, Ajay, explain the money trail to me in a little more detail. Now, experts, I think, estimate $20 billion flowing out illegally to these platforms, basically, with tax evasion alone exceeding $4 billion. How's this really happening?
Yeah, that's my favorite part of the story, actually. Like the money trail is actually where the whole thing becomes really interesting and at the same time quite worrying. So these offshore betting platforms don't directly collect money through a registered merchant account in India. Of course, we know that. Instead, they rely on a network of what are called mule accounts. So imagine you are a user and you want to deposit, let's say, 1,000 rupees on one of these platforms. The website shows you a QR code. You can scan it and send the money through UPI. But the QR code usually belongs not to the company, but to an individual account. So it could be a shopkeeper, a small vendor, or someone who has essentially rented out their bank account to these companies. So that person becomes a kind of a collection point for these platforms. So they might receive money from multiple, users during the day. Then that money gets aggregated and moved to another set of accounts and then another. So it moves through several layers before it eventually reaches the offshore betting operator. So on the surface, what the banking system sees is just a regular P2P UPI transfer or a peer-to-peer UPI transfer between two individuals. There's no merchant tag, there is no gaming category code, MCC as we call it, attached to it. So which means it doesn't automatically raise a red flag for the payment providers. That's what makes the system so difficult to track. By the time the money has passed through multiple accounts, it becomes extremely hard to trace where it ultimately ended up. That's what a lot of payment folks told us. So as you mentioned, when you scale this up across millions of transactions, Industry experts estimate that as much as 20 billion could be flowing out of India through offshore betting platforms, and with billions more in tax revenue that the government potentially loses.
Right. And we'll come to that in a bit. But let's talk about guardrails and the law that is supposed to sort of put a stop to all this. Tell me about PROGA. One important thing is that it hasn't even been brought to force yet. And if it hasn't been brought into force, what is really the legal statute against real money gaming?
Right. So the Promotion and Regulation of Online Gaming Act 2025, or PROGA, is meant to be India's first comprehensive central law for online gaming. You're right, it has been passed, but it hasn't come into force yet. So in practical terms, PROGA isn't the main law currently being used to regulate real money gaming. Right now, we have a mix of older laws. There's the biggest one, which is Public Gambling Act 1867, a colonial era law that bans running gambling houses. And then you also have your Information Technology Act 2000 to block illegal offshore betting websites and apps. But no matter how many illegal offshore betting sites you block, another one will keep popping up, which will be slightly similar or mirroring which one you just blocked, which drives people to again use it. So historically, Indian courts have drawn a distinction between games of skill and games of chance. And real money gaming companies have often argued that their platform fall under games of skill, which is why many of them have been able to operate legally despite the broader restriction on gambling. I mean, that's why we had this whole debate, multiple court cases going on for years. And finally, PROGA came into effect in August. So yeah, PROGA is not currently applicable, but you have a lot of other laws which stop the usage of illegal gambling websites in India.
Understood. Also, clearly the ban has failed in multiple ways. RMG platforms have reportedly recorded asset write-downs of more than $840 million. So they've clearly been impacted. What's more critical is that about 7,000 Indian workers have lost their jobs, according to the same report. Also, if you look at it another way, and one of you, Ajay, did allude to taxes that the government had earned. Apparently, the industry generated 200 billion rupees annually in direct and indirect taxes. That too is lost. So, final point, and which is also the original point when this ban was being discussed and announced, shouldn't the government really regulate this space instead of banning it?
So, Anirban, I don't think that the ban has failed in every way. I mean, from the government's point of view, the concern is quite clear. Betting and certain forms of real money gaming can raise issues around addiction, financial losses, and fraud. So the intention behind tightening rules was to curb those risks and protect consumers. But critics of the current approach argue that the bans don't necessarily eliminate the activity. They often just push it somewhere else.
So some experts believe that a well-regulated system with a clear licensing rules, taxation, and strong safeguards for players could potentially be more effective than a blanket ban. But ultimately, it's a very complex policy question. Policymakers have to strike a balance between protecting users on one hand and also ensuring that, the ecosystem doesn't simply move into a gray or unregulated market.
Disha, Ajay, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for taking time out for our story, Anirban.
Thank you, Anirban, for having us.
The numbers don't lie. Banning real money gaming has not made it disappear, it's simply made it more dangerous and less accountable. And underneath it all lies an unresolved constitutional fault line. The ban has been implemented by the center, but it's states that hold the power to regulate gambling, and the internet respects no state border. Until India resolves that tension and several others, the offshore boom will only continue. That's it for today. You were listening to this episode on The Morning Brief. It was produced by me, sound designed by Indranil Bhattacharjee. A new episode of The Morning Brief drops every Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday on your favorite listening platform. Stay tuned.